Hey everybody, I'm joined by wonderful violist Kimia Hesabi. We're talking about her forthcoming album, Nemāno Gaona. No, I did that wrong.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
Okay, great, awesome. Well, uh, how's it going? Thanks so much for hopping on Zoom. It's a wonderful project, chronicling a sort of a wide range of music for viola by Iranian composers, both diasporic and also still in Iran. Why don't you sort of give us an overview of your? This has been like a sort of wide ranging thing, not just a recording project, but a scholarship project and research. And so, give us some background.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and for putting this out there. As you said, yes, the album's called Nemāno Gaona, and I'm happy to tell you a little bit about that. But a little bit of a backstory is that I've been, since I moved to the US in 2014 to go to school here, this is something that I've always been asked about. Like, so what is the music of Iran like? Can you play anything on the viola of that? And this just always had been in the back of my mind to like explore the literature and just see what's going on. But technically, when I started my dissertation for my doctoral degree, this became a very focused topic for me and focused project. And I kind of digged deeper into what I can find. And of course, there were several composers that when I lived in Iran, I had heard about and I kind of knew. And there were some that throughout this process by social media or talking to a friend or a friend of a friend, I kind of got to know the composers that I ended up collaborating with. And it was just so interesting when I started the research because I assumed that I'm just going to find several works, but at first I was surprised kind of by the number. It wasn't as many as I thought it should be for viola, and that kind of began the discussions with some of the composers. What if we could, collaborate on creating some pieces together? And I was so lucky that I was able to collaborate with them. And so some of the pieces became commissions, and some were existing pieces that I got to perform for the first time, or they had also been performed. So that kind of started it, and it became my dissertation project. I chose to do some research on it, perform it, and then record it. So some of the tracks were recorded in 2019, just when I was graduating, and then of course the pandemic happened. So a few of the tracks were recorded in my living room and by my husband. So it just kind of continued on throughout the pandemic, and it was finally finished, I think, early 2021. But then I also collaborated with the composers to dig a little bit deeper into the stories of the pieces and their compositions, and that resulted in an article that I wrote for the Journal of the American Viola Society, where we kind of dig deep into the history of contemporary music in Iran a little bit and just kind of the writings of this piece.
Great. Yeah, we were chatting a bit before I hit record. It's always interesting when you have a collection like this of, music from one geographical place or one country, and but within that, there's so much diversity. Of course, diversity of experience, different. I mean, some of the composers on this album still live in Iran, right?
Yes.
Some live in the States. Some might identify more or less closely with their Iranian sort of background in at least musically. And
Yes.
just listening through, there's a really nice balance between what one might think of as sort of like almost universalist avant-garde type of material versus stuff that's drawn specifically from Iranian like folk music. So, what I mean, how is that when you were working with composers to generate new material? How did that process go? Did that question come up? Did people feel
Well,
like there was like a sort of implication that you wanted it to be more grounded in traditional music, or it didn't really? They just did whatever they wanted.
right. I think it was more like I just trusted them with whatever they felt inspired and what their creative path was. I didn't talk about like I wanted to sound this way or that. I just kind of told them this is a project I'm doing. These are some of the other pieces that I already have. Do you think you have something for me? And it just organically happened based on what they felt. inspired by or connected to. And as you say, yes, it is. I feel like it's such a diverse range when you think about like the styles and the levels of inspiration from what we can call like the classical Iranian music or folk Iranian music. There are hints of some of that in some of the pieces in like very, very different and unique ways. I think you can hear a glimpse of that inspiration in Giti Raza's pieces, Song in Whispers, where the song like sections remind you of Iranian melodies. Now, those are melodies that Giti wrote. Of course, they're only their her original work, but as we spoke, she says that this is just kind of my take on that. I'm not necessarily relating that to a very specific, piece or genre of music. This is just kind of what I imagine that music to be or how I relate. Whereas if you listen to the piece by Shawan Tabakol, Camel, there's very specific inspirations and there's very specific deliberation about Iranian classical music and the modes and the Mccombs and the even instruments that are used, because Shawan is a performer of kamanche, which is an Iranian bowed string instrument, and he specifically designed the piece to kind of showcase that kind of Iranian fiddling or Iranian classical playing on string instruments. And you can clearly hear that. You can hear his experience with the modes and how masterfully he kind of designs this piece around that. So yes, I think the there's such a wide range here. And yeah, as I said, I don't think there was anything from me specifically that I wanted something to sound a specific way. I just wanted to see what they come up with, and I was just in the best way surprised with all the pieces that I got.
Yeah, yeah, it's a wonderful collection. I'm glad you brought up the Comanche. Am I saying yeah? And
Yes,
also
Cameron.
Mccombs. Maybe let's listen a little bit to Giti Razaz's piece, and then talk a bit more about that after. So this is an excerpt from a bit into the piece. It's Song and Whispers, and here it is. Beautiful. So yeah, actually, I'm curious. I mean, I don't know a ton about Mccombs. I've heard some Comanche performances live, and it's always been amazing. Uh, but I'm sure there's also a lot of diversity between the kinds of makams and modes you might find in like Turkish music or Arabic music further west versus Iranian music, which is a different culture and is sort of different. But there's also this idea of like cross pollination musically, because there were some like so many trading routes that sort of connected those regions. It, a lot of it is sort of based on quarter tone settled adjustments, right?
I think so, yes.
Yeah,
I have to say I'm not an expert at all when it comes to that because I'm classically trained.
sure.
Uh, but I do think that yes, the intervallic systems are like that.
Yeah, cool. And I mean, what did you in Giti's piece, like you mentioned that it seems like she's sort of evoking the Comanche. Uh,
That is for
oh no,
camel
that's
toe.
oh sorry, that was Camel. Uh, so I think I mixed the two up. But anyway, like I guess these sort of a lot of the glissandi type gestures and like the sort of fluid, very expressive, like subtle intonation things might sort of point back to.
Yeah, I think so. So Giti's be sung in whispers. At the title kind of tells the story very well. So you have these sections that are song-like as she describes them, and there's sections that are kind of the whispers. So in the whisper sections, you hear these kind of whispery, of course, very atmospheric sounds. These glissandi that go back and forth, like on high on the C string. They're very like light touch, and then they are kind of contrasted with these song sections that are very melodic, very flourishing, and just written kind of soaring quality, very, very beautiful melodies that she composed. And this excerpt that we've listened explores that really well. It just shows this kind of big range of pitches, and as you said, there are techniques like glides and slides, or certain kind of ornaments that in my head kind of resemble the some of the vocal qualities and some of just like the improvisational techniques you hear in instrumental music. But of course she does it in such an original way. It doesn't specifically make you think of a very like specific mode or specific thing that maybe she had in mind, but it just has this general idea and resemblance to what I'd identify as Iranian music or Iranian melodies. And so I think that's what makes it really original, but also has that hint of nostalgia to that music.
And all that I think makes it a really. It's the first piece on the album,
Yes.
and it sort of straddles the worlds of it. It has some elements of sort of a more, like I said, universalist avant-garde quality, but it also draws somewhat on a sort of more national folkloric tradition. So it's a great way to sort of get into the set, I think.
Yes.
Should we move now to the Tavakol, which is more explicitly evoking the Comanche?
Absolutely, yes. So Camel Toe by Showan Tavako is a piece that's in two movements. The first movement is for viola and mezzo soprano, and the text in the first movement is from the Rumi's Matnavi, which is his, most prolific writing and one of the most well-known pieces of literature from the Middle East, specifically Iran, I would say. And so it is just so beautifully written. The text is in Farsi, of course, and the way that movement works is kind of it resembles a vocal instrumental technique in Iranian music that is called avaz and Javab Avaz. So Avaz in Farsi means singing, and Javab Avaz in Farsi means response to singing. So you could imagine it as this improvisational conversation between a vocalist and a performer, where the vocalist performs a section of a melody and the instrumentalist kind of responds in an imitative but also again improvisational way to that. So it's kind of this dialogue that goes. So in no point in that movement the both instruments play together. It's always vocal viola, vocalist viola, and just ends with kind of a cadenza like section for the viola. And then you go into the second movement, which is just for solo viola, and is a very contrasting mood. It's very rhythmic, it's very virtuosic, and it really, I think, captures the essence of what he imagines as, the very virtuosic Comanche playing. Lots of string crossings and very rapid rhythmic changes, also very still melodic. There's lots of really great melodies that you hear, and he still manages to fit a little bit of a almost like a cadenza that's almost improvisation. I mean, he's composed it, but the way he's written it really reminds you of if you went to a concert and you were listening to a solo Comanche, like this could really be that. And even the order he places the movements kind of resembles the kind of classical concert setting for Iranian music, where you would hear a little bit of improvisational section and then you might conclude with something more rhythmical. And so this kind of, I think, in a very beautiful way captures that. And I think because of his background in Iranian classical music and his knowledge, he does such a wonderful job of organically um, giving you a glimpse of that world without, being too, I guess, I don't know. It's just very, very organic and beautiful, I think.
Great. Yeah. Uh, a quick question about the first movement. So you're sort of talking about how he's capturing this sort of improvisational dialogue between the voice and the viola. That's all through composed, though, like in terms of, right? Even though, like, I guess
Yes,
in a traditional context, it would be sort of more uh, like part of a learned performance practice that wouldn't necessarily need to.
absolutely.
That's an
Yeah,
interesting challenge, I think, for a composer to try to sort of capture that in traditional notation, since so much of it is very sort of, it's all about very subtle timing things in the moment.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're completely correct. I mean, it is completely through compose, like the
Yeah.
notation is very exact and detailed, but I think that in our conversations, he does give the performer a little bit of, freedom to explore the timing, because it's not very like set in stone. You still have freedom within those written notation, but of course, even the way it's notated, it already kind of opens the door for you to be able to do that. And I think it again goes back to him knowing this style of music so well and being a master of that improvisatory techniques himself, so that he can kind of give you that context and then set you up in a very great and easy way to kind of approach, even for a non-Iranian performer, I would say. So I'm the second violist who plays that piece. The first one who did is not Iranian, and the fact that, and I've seen the recording of that, is beautiful. So the fact that another performer from another culture is also able to pick that up, I think that's what he's done such a great work of, just like writing that in such an organic way. It's easy for anybody to pick that up. But yes, it
Yeah.
is completely through compose,
Yeah.
but given some freedom to the performer as well.
That's a great point. I think whenever whenever a composer is drawing from sort of different music cultures, it seems to be the key is that they are an expert in both. You know that the translation can be seamless,
Yes,
and that's when it comes off in a very natural way. And it's almost like the word hybrid doesn't need to be there anymore because it's its own thing. You know.
absolutely. And
So
that, I think, goes to say that that is one of the reasons I wanted these pieces to be out there. I, of course, am happy to perform it, but I really think these are works that other violists can explore. I
definitely.
talk in detail in my article about this, that like one of my goals with my project was to not introduce these pieces, because I don't think they need introduction. They're fantastic works, they stand on their own. But I think there needs to be more of these pieces in the canon, performed by not necessarily people like me that come from that background, but I think there is enough there for everybody, and it's approachable. It's not written in a way where only certain people can identify with or relate to. I think it's they're all are written in such great ways that, as I said, any violist could play them, and I think that's what makes them really valuable, in my opinion.
Most definitely. Couldn't agree more. Let's listen to the first an excerpt from the first movement of Shawan Tavakol's Kamalto. Right? Very beautiful. And I neglected to mention the mezzo soprano who joined you for that track is Lori Sen.
Dorishan, yes, she is fantastic. Yes.
Great. Yeah. Cool. So should we move on to are you hearing that echo or is that just on my end?
I don't hear it.
Oh, good. Okay. Should we move on to Veiled?
Yes.
Uh, this is Nilufar Norbash.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
go ahead and introduce this one to us.
Absolutely. So this piece was written by Nilüfer, I think in 2019 for Amanda Gukin, the cellist. And so this was first written as a cello version. And then when I had discussions with Nilüfer about my project, she was kind enough to say, hey, I have this piece and I'm thinking of, writing a version for viola. Would you be interested in exploring? I was like, absolutely, because I had listened to the piece and I loved it. It's just such a fantastic piece, and the story behind it is just so important, so amazing. So we had some discussions, and she sent me, and so the story behind this piece is so captivating that but I have to say, even if you don't know the programmatic aspect, the piece on its own is just beautiful and it's just so well done. But when you do hear about the story, it just makes it even more interesting. So this piece is based on certain events that occurred in Iran, basically protests that happened in response to obligatory hijab for women. And so these were very tragic and unfortunate, and so many people, of course, died as a result of those. And so Nilüfer was so moved by this event, and she wanted to talk about this piece and talk about it in this piece or through this piece. So Veiled as the title, just kind of is very interesting because what happens throughout the piece is that you hear viola and you hear these electronic sounds that some are pre-recorded and some are live. So throughout the piece, you don't just hear a viola sound, you hear these the mixture of multiple kind of sounds and effects, a pre-recorded female voice, other sound effects, and there is this relationship between viola and voice that becomes really interesting. So in the beginning of the piece, you hear a lot of the viola, and I think this is symbolic in a way that the voice of women in Iran are veiled, and as the piece progresses, the voice becomes unveiled. So the except that this piece that we'll hear, you hear the pre-recorded female voice become this prominent part, and viola is now accompanying it. So the roles have reversed, and you can say that the voice is unveiled. And at this point, they become one together and kind of go through the finish line of the piece and get to this almost explosive quality where you've not only unveiled but also just really just going for it. And I think it's in such a captivating way, her response to bravery of a lot of women who were involved in that protest, and just her take on the experience, and just the unfortunate kind of aftermath of that. So I think the story is just beautiful, and the way the piece captures that musically, it's just so effective. So it's been such an honor to play that piece. Yeah.
Great. Let's take a listen to that excerpt. This is Veiled by Nilüfer Norbash. Wonderful. Well, before we wrap up, maybe do you want to just make a brief mention of the other great we have a sort of limited amount of time. Otherwise, it'd be great to sort of talk about all of them. But of course, that's also why people should check out the album. But give us a short rundown on some of the other music and composers.
Absolutely. So I have two pieces by Ali Reza Mashayekhi, one of the most prolific composers of Iranian contemporary music. He's kind of an amazing person, but that in his works kind of open doors for a lot of future composers to come. And his writings and his research and his presence in the music community of Iran has just been so prolific and amazing. And so he has numerous pieces that have been recorded over the years, and I was so lucky to perform his sonata for viola and piano, which I happened to be the first person to play it, even though it was written in the 60s. And then also Variant for solo viola, which also there is a violin version of that as well. And so I was also lucky to play that. And the two pieces kind of say it all about his style of what a diverse kind of language and just variety of things that throughout his like 30 plus years of work as a composer he's captured. And so I really I can't wait for people to hear the two pieces and kind of see the musical language and how they are just so varied and fantastic. And the two other pieces, one is by Bahar Royai. It's called Tombstone. It's a piece in three movements that captures basically a poem that is based around the theme of death, and it imagines a tombstone for a person. So this one's called A Tombstone for Simin. And it's a fantastic piece that captures viola in a very unique way. It explores registers that are very uncommon, I feel like, for the instrument, and colors that you hear are just very, very unique. And the final piece is by Mujgan Shahian, who is a friend of mine. We went to high school together, and the fact that she wrote this piece for me, it's just such a blessing and honor. And it's based on stories from folk music of Iran, specifically the region of Baluchistan. It explores a tragic love story between Hani and Shemrit, and it's a piece in four movements that kind of tells that story in Mushkan's way. It's a very beautiful piece.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Well, this is coming out on the 17th of June. Catalog number is FCR 315. It's going to be in all the places that one finds music these days. And it's already up for pre order on Bandcamp, and I'm pretty sure Amazon, if not now, within the next couple of days. And it's really a wonderful collection, as we discussed, sort of hits a wide aesthetic diversity, but has a real core in terms of the sort of associations back to various aspects of Iranian culture. Before I forget, just want to mention some quick credits. Recording, editing, and mastering by Antonino Dorzo and Emery Hensley. And the album art was by Emery Hensley. So thanks so much for hopping on Zoom. It was great to chat with you, Kimia. And congratulations. Really excited to put this out.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's been a pleasure, and thanks again for briefing.
Likewise. Take care. Bye, everybody.